The United States will not withdraw from the negotiation process to end Russia's war against Ukraine under any circumstances. And the White House is gently asking Europe to support Donald Trump's foreign policy and still move forward together. The old world order has collapsed. It's time to build a new one together. Moreover, the United States is convincing Europe that they are not going to leave joint Euro-Atlantic alliances like NATO, but on the contrary, are ready to strengthen them even more. And all the previous scandals between the United States and Europe were just misunderstandings. The speech by Marco Rubio, the United States Secretary of State, at the Munich Security Conference pleasantly surprised Europeans. In it, he clearly outlined the new foreign policy program of Donald Trump's administration. Marco Rubio called on Europeans to revive their friendship with America, but immediately added that this friendship should be based on the slogan, "Make the West Great Again." Marco Rubio urged Europeans to wake up and realize that the post-war era of the 20th century, the era of prosperity, is already over. Global trade is not the guarantee of a rules-based world order, and purely cynical and pragmatic national interests should come first. There will be no more world without borders from now on. Marco Rubio called for fighting illegal migration and abandoning climate initiatives as they have driven the West into a dangerous trap. Well, overall, it was a sobering speech by United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which definitely struck a chord with Europeans, but also showed exactly where America is heading now. Therefore, in this episode, I suggest we analyze the main points voiced by Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference. Because this very speech will become the program, and it will define the foreign policy of America and Europe. Well, at least for the next 3 years, and most likely even longer. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video, where we post breaking news as it comes in.
Are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours.
So, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio made a splash at the Munich Security Conference, and in his Saturday speech clearly outlined the future foreign policy of the Make America Great Again movement in Germany. Marco Rubio warned the participants of the Munich Security Conference about the dangers of mass migration, while emphasizing the shared heritage of Europe and the United States. But essentially, Marco Rubio was urging Europe to simply adopt Donald Trump's policies and move forward together using those very policies. Marco Rubio repeated several times that the United States of America is not going anywhere, is not planning to leave, and does not want to do so. Moreover, Marco Rubio says, don't worry, America will not leave the negotiation process to end Russia's war against Ukraine. This is not the scenario where, if something goes wrong, Trump might back out. Marco Rubio says no, that will never happen. And overall, Marco Rubio's message, "Make the West Great Again," basically matched the speech of United States Vice President John Doe Ewens at the same conference, but last year. But while John Doe Ewens' words caused a scandal back then, Marco Rubio's tone was softer, and he was more measured in his rhetoric, which led to applause rather than any kind of shock. But the essence, both for Rubio and Ewens, came down to one thing: the old world is finished. As Marco Rubio stated, the United States doctrine is now free from the dangerous delusion of a world where supposedly global free trade liberates people, or that the international order was ever truly based on rules. But now, let's go through Marco Rubio's entire speech, quote by quote. So, here's Marco Rubio. He started by saying that in the 1960s, when the Munich Security Conference was just beginning, Europe was divided and communism was spreading across the planet. And back then, Europe and the United States decided to join forces, and as a result, they won. Next is a quote from Rubio. Europe and America prevailed, the continent was rebuilt, and our people prospered. And when the Western and Eastern blocs united, civilization became whole again. That ill-fated wall was torn down, and with it, the evil empire. Well, here he's talking about the Berlin Wall. But the euphoria from this triumph led us to the dangerous delusion that we had entered some kind of end of history. That every nation would now become a liberal democracy, that the bonds of trade alone would replace statehood, that a rules-based world order would replace national interests, and that we would live in a world without borders, where everyone would be a citizen of the world. It was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and the lessons of 5,000 years of history, and it cost us dearly. Well, here's what happened next. Marco Rubio says directly that it was this worldview that led Western nations to adopt a dogmatic vision of free and unrestricted trade. Even when China or Russia clearly weren't playing by the rules and were only protecting their own interests. Moreover, while Europe believed in free trade, Russia got Europe hooked on its energy resources, and China subsidized its own companies to destroy Western industry. In Europe, people started thinking, well, listen, it's cheaper to buy Chinese goods than to develop our own factories. Why bother? After all, there's free trade in the world. Everyone's friends, the world is open. Why oppose anything? But it turned out to be a trap. And, as Marco Rubio says, this way the West was handing over its sovereignty to international organizations. Many invested in prosperity, but didn't care at all that the country didn't even have a proper army to protect that very prosperity. Meanwhile, Russia and China were investing money in their armies, and they are not shy about using force to impose their views. Moreover, Rubio stated that the entire climate agenda is also a trap, saying that while Europe was busy with the climate cult, its opponents were openly exploiting oil, coal, and natural gas, not only to strengthen their economies, but also to use it against the West. And Rubio also stated that the policy of a world without borders has also led to disaster. Since Europe was flooded with migrants who undermined the culture of social cohesion in the West, undermined the culture, and overall undermined the heritage as a whole. And next, I will give a key quote from Marco Rubio, in which he calls on Europe to reconcile and still move forward together with the United States of America, but under certain conditions. Here is the quote: "We made all these mistakes together, and now together we must acknowledge these facts in order to move forward. And even though we are ready, if necessary, to do all this on our own, we prefer and hope to do it together with you, our friends, here in Europe. Europe and the United States belong to a single whole. We are connected to each other by the deepest bonds possible between nations, bound by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, and the sacrifices of our ancestors. That's why we Americans can sometimes be direct and a bit urgent in our advice. The reason is that we care. We care deeply about your future and ours, even when we disagree. These disagreements come from a deep sense of concern for Europe, which connects us spiritually and culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive, because the two great wars of the last century serve as a constant reminder that, in the end, our fate will always be inextricably linked with yours. And that was a very powerful moment, which caused a storm of applause in the hall. The Europeans applauded it. Well, after that, Marco Rubio started openly promoting Make America Great Again ideas for Europe. His message was the following: even if Europe has a super strong army and the most powerful weapons, what exactly will it be defending? Has the culture that was born here been preserved, or has migration eroded cultural and religious ties? And as Rubio says, haven't money and profit triumphed over common sense? And here Marco Rubio moved on to the issue of migration and addressed it harshly. By the way, I would really like Angela Merkel to listen carefully to these words and maybe finally admit that she once made a mistake. Mass migration is not a marginal concern without consequences. It has been and remains a crisis that is evolving and destabilizing Western societies. Controlling who and how many people we let in is not an act of xenophobia. It's not hatred. It's a fundamental act of national sovereignty and the inability to do so. It's not only a renunciation of one of our basic duties to our people, it's an urgent threat to the structure of our societies and civilizations. And finally, we can no longer put the so-called world order above the interests of our people and our nations. Moving on. Interestingly, Marco Rubio called for a complete reform of all international organizations, especially the United Nations. And I'll just remind you that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, back in 2021, speaking at the United Nations General Assembly before the big war, called for exactly the same thing. But back then, he wasn't heard. But today, Marco Rubio says, we don't need to leave the system of international cooperation, which we ourselves created, but it needs to be reformed and rebuilt. For example, the United Nations has played virtually no role in the most important issues. It failed to resolve the war in the Gaza Strip, and it did not resolve the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership just to bring both sides to the negotiating table in search of an elusive peace. The United Nations was powerless to contain the nuclear program of the radical Shiite clerics in Iran. The United Nations failed to eliminate the threat to our security from the narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. We cannot allow those who openly threaten our citizens and global security to hide behind the abstractions of international law, which they themselves constantly violate. That was a really powerful message directed at the Russians. First of all, because it's Moscow that especially likes to appeal to international law, when their interests are affected, but completely disregards that same international law when waging war against Ukraine. And here's more. Rubio stated directly that the United States is not leaving Western alliances like NATO. But at the same time, they expect these to be truly strong alliances, ready to act, even up to the use of weapons, without looking back at anything else. Another one of his quotes, "In America, we have no interest in being polite and decent guardians of Western decline. We want our alliances not to be paralyzed by fears of climate change, war, technology, and so on. Our only fear is the fear of shame if our nations are not proud, strong, and prosperous for our children. We want alliances that are ready to defend our people, protect our interests, and give us the freedom to shape our own destiny. Alliances that won't politely pretend our way of life is just one among many, and ask for permission before taking action. For us Americans, our home may be the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be children of Europe." And here, Marco Rubio didn't just say for nothing that America is a child of Europe. Here he recalled that the history of America began with an Italian explorer whose journey into the great unknown to discover a new world brought Christianity to America. The first settlements in America were built by English settlers. The borders were shaped by Irish Scots. The lands of the Midwest were developed by German farmers and craftsmen, and so on and so forth. And Marco Rubio also ended his speech at the Munich Security Conference with a powerful message, quote, "Together, we rebuilt a fragmented continent after 2 world wars, when we were once again divided by the Iron Curtain. The Free West extended weapons to brave dissidents fighting tyranny in the East to defeat Soviet communism. We fought each other, reconciled, fought again, reconciled again, and died side by side on battlefields from Kapkion to Kandahar. And today I want to make it clear, America is paving the way to a new century of prosperity, and we want to do it together with you, our precious allies and old friends. Now we must face the challenges of the new century because yesterday is over, the future is inevitable, and our destiny awaits." I'll leave it at that, friends. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support our YouTube channel with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. I would be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.